Alright, so today we're going to be looking at evolution. We're going to do a review. If I have time, hopefully I can get a practice test out, but that will be for another video. So yeah, we're going to start with what we did in class 1, which is the history of evolution. So Leclerc, he was the first guy to ever came up with the idea of, evolution in its first form. However, he was under the Holy Church or whatever that was. So he was in France. He was under the Holy Church, and the church did not believe this. The church thought his idea was stupid. So he kind of kicked him out of the country and all of that, which is pretty stupid. However, that's what happened. But the clerk was pretty rich. He was a fairly wealthy French collector. So because of that, he was able to get around because he had money, so he didn't get killed. If somebody like that was pretty poor that came up with that idea, then they're probably gonna get killed. Now, he came up with this idea purely because he collected stuff, collected rocks or animals or plants or flowers, whatever, and he looked at them. However, the next guy we're gonna introduce, he's much more analytical. So his name is Georges Cuvier. He studied rocks and fossils. He was credited for early paleontology, which is the study of rocks. So he kind of looked at these and he realized, hey, you know what? These kind of look similar. So these fossils that I find, they kind of look similar to the ones on the ground these days. So he was like, maybe they have some sort of relationship. So he analyzed and he came up with the idea that, hey, maybe there was this sudden storm or sudden environmental disaster that killed everything. Remember, killed everything. And now all that's left is some new animals that's very different from the fossils that he has. So probably the fossils that he have are pretty old because it takes a long time to evolve. But however, his idea was classified as catastrophism, and it's one of the ideas that we had in the early time. Another guy in the 17th era was Lamarck. Lamarck was really smart though. He compared living ones to the fossils, very recent fossils. Unlike Cuvier, he just looked at them. So Lamarck was like, hey, you know what? Maybe there was this timeline of species, and these stuff, they just changed gradually. However, they changed so slowly that we just, we don't really know what's happening. Well, he kind of came up with this idea that eventually the species, they have these beneficial traits, and some of them, they have these and they're able to pass it on. He came up with the idea of the inheritance of acquired traits. It basically said that these organisms that have this beneficial trait has a better chance of surviving and passing these beneficial traits to their very own offspring. And after that, we have an economist, which is pretty weird to see in a biology class, but this guy's name was Malthus. Unexpectedly, he does contribute to biology. He came up with the hypothesis that we're humans and we need resources to live. Unfortunately, we're producing very little food that cannot take on this population. We have too much people and we have too little food. So eventually, humans are going to self-reduce the population. And self-reduce, it probably just means kill or whatever, how you would say it. It's not nice. So the idea is that Darwin took this idea and made something new to it. But we just entered the 18,000 era. We're going to look at what happened. So Charles was actually the first one to come up with some ideas. So this guy, he opposed Cuvier. He thought Earth was constantly changing as well. So he thinks that it's too slow. We don't notice. And on top of these conclusions, he also brought up the fact that our Leclerc brought up. He thinks, hey, maybe the Earth is older than just 6,000 years old. Maybe it's just a lot older than that, actually. So he came with the idea. And then, he didn't make much contributions after that. That's all he did. Because, it was a quite limited time in his place. And it was not easy for him to come up with some new ideas. So then we have the actual big guy of this entire thing. Name is Darwin. You probably know him. Seen him all over your Instagram posts. Or, yeah. This Darwin, he was not knowledgeable because he was just, he just learned. No. This guy was a traveler. He traveled around the world. He traveled for fun or, for his studies. This guy was very smart. He analyzed and he recorded these things. And because he worked in a museum, he has all of these resources available to him of the past and, all of that. So, because he had all of these resources in front of him, he was able to come up with the conclusion of, hey, you know what? Maybe things are, some sort of things is happening to them, but we just don't know what, because we're not that smart yet. So obviously he came up with that idea, and he came up with questions to help him, because he was like the first form of scientist. He realized, hey, maybe we needed some questions to guide us, and once we find these questions, we're gonna be able to solve them. So he analyzed all of these economic ideas and other biologists and naturalists. He wrote The Origins of Species, and that was like the big book in biology. It was like changed all ideas of biology, and now, whoa, it's so cool. It's so new that we don't know what's going on, any of them. So, however, he didn't publish this because it really opposed what happened that time. People wanted to believe in God. People wanted to have a religion. So people I think Jesus guides us, or some sort of belief. However, because this highly, and I mean highly, opposed that idea, he was not very supported. And because he was not very supported, he just didn't publish it, because he knew he would get a lot of oppression. So he kept it. He kept it in his drawer and kept it safe, and nobody knew that he ever wrote this book. However, a couple years went by. Darwin was just doing his life. And about when he was going to go ahead and burn this book, because he thinks, hey, it's just full of my hypothesis. It's never going to be true. It's never going to be real. So not the second, but around the time that he was going to do this, there was this kid. His name was Wallace. So Wallace was a young guy. And in science world, we all know, young guys, they don't get much tribute. They're just there, they don't know too much. Whenever you are young and you try to pull up to like one of those conferences, they're like, hey, you know nothing about this. You're just a young dude. You don't know nothing about biology. And then all of that. So that's what people thought of him. And that's what most people thought of him. So he was like, oh no, I'm just unsupported because I'm young. So he decided, I'm gonna not email. I'm gonna write Darwin a mail. I'm gonna go up to him and tell him all my ideas, because hey, Alfred learned a lot from Darwin, because Darwin was really respectable. He was a very smart guy at that time. So he wrote him all of these ideas, and then Darwin, he saw this. He realized, oh my God, all of his ideas are so similar to mine. Wait, maybe my book is correct. So he pulled up to the bookstore and he published his book. And now we have The Origins of Species. Wallace doesn't get enough credit because, well, whenever you think about Origins of Species, you just think about Darwin. You never talk about our Wallace guy, because nobody knows him. And that was the end of class 1. And that was pretty much the most important thing that we need to know about history of species. And yeah, so we're gonna start class 2. Class 2 was adaptations and variations. We learned that all variations must come from a mutation. However, that variation it's not usually beneficial. It could be bad, it could be good, or most of the time it's just neutral. It's not bad, it's not good. However, one key thing to remember here, that only mutations in the sex cell or gametic cells, they will be passed on. Any mutations in a normal somatic cell, a skin cell, or whatever, they won't be passed on. They're just there. You're never gonna pass them on. So when you die, or sorry, not you, but when that specific species that had this somatic cell mutation, when they die, that trait just gone. It's just gone. They're not gonna pass it on. However, we gotta understand that variation do exist within a population. There are different breed of dog, different breeds of cats, and all that, different colors, and all that. Yeah. So they exist. You gotta know them. You gotta know that they exist. You can't be like, oh, old populations are just the same thing. No. All right. So, and then we learned the actual beneficial adaptation. So remember, variation is always it's just neutral, and adaptation is always beneficial. So adaptation is a variation that will help the organism survive and reproduce. There are three types of adaptation: behavioral, structural, and physiological. Behavioral is behavior change, simple. Structure is change of color, change of looks, just pretty much structural change. And some might get bigger, some might grow longer teeth because they need to kill more stuff or whatever. And then we have physiological. That's when you are doing some internal stuff, maybe developing a venom for snakes, or you could have, let's say, some. What do I also have? Yeah, cheetah's strong heart. You can't run that fast if you don't have a strong heart. So cheetahs develop his heart really strong. So that is pretty much all in class 2. We didn't learn too much. We looked at examples mainly. So we looked at class 3. Why do all of these happen? Well, it's because of selection. There is some sort of selection going on in nature all of the time, whether it's natural or we did it or whatever. There's always these things that drive evolution forward. Because hey, evolution, it's not gonna happen. Well, it's going to happen, but if you don't have anything directing it, what's the point of evolution? So obviously, when we look at it, there's always going to be a point of evolution, and that point is to survive better. We looked at an example of an English pepper moth, which is that the trees were originally white, so the white moth obviously blended into the environment much better than the black ones. So as a result, they survived much better. However, later on, the trees, because of industrial revolution, they turned black. So now suddenly the black ones are blended into the environment much better. And then selective pressure. It's basically a genetic advantage that a species get because it has certain phenotypes. And when I say phenotypes, I mean like physical looks. And then we talked back to about the idea of fitness. So what is fit? Well, biologically speaking, fit is how many grandkids you have. And selective pressure on top of this. It's an environmental factors that will select for certain characteristics of individuals. And remember, it will always select against some sort of phenotype. And we also looked at the bacteria. Well, what happened to the bacteria? Well, suddenly we fed this patient some antibiotic that's supposedly able to kill the bacteria. However, some of the bacteria developed a special mutation that allowed them to be completely immune to this. So, however, because of the bacteria's high rate of reproduction, they spread quickly and extremely quickly along the population. So suddenly, like maybe a day ago, you had like one mutated bacteria that was resistant to let's say to the antibiotics, but suddenly tomorrow you just have a full bunch of them. It's kind of insane, I know, but you get the idea. So fast reproduction rate is a huge factor when it comes to the idea of evolving and evolution, because it just helps reproduction and all that. Yep, and that was pretty much it. And no, we're gonna talk about the difference. So while natural selection is pretty much nature trying to do its work to select for the fitter one to survive, we also do this, but we're not as kind as nature. We do it because we want it. Let's say I want this specific breed of dog, like German Shepherd. So I bred that dog because it looks good. Unlike the nature trying to do its job to get more survivors, I'm trying to satisfy my own desire. However, this comes at a cost, and usually this always comes at a cost, and it's not a good cost. They have very less genetic diversity, because when you're trying to get a certain trait, you're going to keep on interbreeding. You're gonna breed them with like their relatives, so you get that trait more often. So we do this, but however, a big downside of this is we have so little genetic variation because we're always inbreeding. and we're always breeding it with its relatives, it means that we're losing a lot of genetic diversity. So essentially, when some sort of virus or bacteria or a disease comes along that attacks this specific genetic, whoop, GG's, all of them is gonna die because they don't have any of these genetic variation. So we established gene banks to counter this. Well, was it successful? No. But did we try our best? Yes, we tried our best to counter it. But class 4, evidence. So there are many fossil layers, and the deeper we go down, the less similar these fossils will look like to the current ones. And in the middle, we have transitional fossils. They have some trait of the ancestor and some trait of the descendants. With using these transitional fossils, we came up with the idea that whales, they used to be a land animal that walked on all its fours. We also looked at the idea that maybe Earth was this one entire piece, and it just got separated later on because of tectonic plates. And that kind of explained Darwin's question of why does an island animal looks very similar to the local coastline. That answered that question. And we also looked at structure, anatomy basically. We looked at what is homologous and analogous structure. So homologous structures is basically similar elements, well, structural elements, however, different functions. Analogous on the other side, it's wait, hold up. It was different structural elements. It looked completely different. Everything is so different. However, because they're in some sort of habitat, it made them have these similar function. And yeah, that was the example. And then we looked at the evidence of evolution in embryology. In bryology or whatever. So we looked at the idea of we're going to look at little embryos of them. So we saw that at the initial stage of life, for every single organism, they look so stupidly similar. They look like they came from the same mother. And that's true, because we came from all one ancestor. So we also realized that they start to differentiate and develop, well, personal traits in the second stage and later on. DNA is obviously DNA is going to be used, but DNA is used to prove evolution. We found similar DNAs in organisms that potentially have some relations, however, they don't live close together. This led us to come to the conclusion that most stuff came from one single ancestor. And that was also proved by embryology. And we also looked at this little graph to show the relations of animals. We can see the lesser panda is most related to a raccoon and least related to a brown bear, and common ancestor here, common ancestor. And there was this, he was really smart. His name is Hardy Weinberg. This man came up with the mathematical equation to prove a biology element, which is crazy, but he did it. So I don't know how he did this, but whatever. So this is pretty reverse psychology though. If this equation works, then there's no evolution. But if this equation fails and completely breaks down and does not work, then that means there is evolution. So, however, we must satisfy a couple factors to be able to use this. And that is, well, let me see. So, well, I didn't write that. Yeah, I did. So there were certain factors that we needed to satisfy. It was large population, no mutation at all, and I mean at all. There cannot be any mutations. The mating is there cannot be non-random mating, so everybody has the same pretty much chance to mate. And most importantly, there was no migration and there was no natural selection. Well, so you might ask, hey, how did this prove evolution? Well, let me tell you this. All of these conditions, they are not satisfied anywhere in this world. Not a single place satisfies them. If you let's just say we put this into a such ideal case that it satisfies 4 of them. It's still not going to be able to satisfy one more. There's no place ever on this earth that's going to satisfy all of these principles. So therefore, with this funny mathematical principle, it was able to actually prove evolution. And then we looked at class 5, mechanisms of evolution. So we looked at the fact that there are mainly 5 ways that evolution is driven. Remember that all of these are microevolutions since we're changing the frequency of a trait in a certain community. So we have, I also reinstated the mutation is the only way that you can get a variation and an adaptation. So, and also talk about this. So yeah, gene flow, that's the first one. Gene flow, this is a transfer of alleles from one community to other. So some individual moved in, or some individual moved out, and they brought this genotype, and then they reproduced in their new community, and they brought in these new genes. Non-random mating. This is also a factor of driving evolution. I know the wording is pretty confusing, but non-random mating means that not everybody has the same chance to mate. So we looked at a bird. The longer tails it has, the better chance it's going to get a mate. So this is another thing that drives evolution. So if the longer tails gets more mate, these birds are going to start developing longer tails because it wants more mate. And then the last one, not the last one, genetic drift. Genetic drift is basically a change in allele frequency due to a completely random event. And when I say random event, I mean it could be like, well, let's say, what was there? What could be there? Let's say, let's see. Maybe there was a tornado that suddenly washed over Toronto, Canada, and it killed 70% of the population. Unfortunate, I know. So we only have 30% left. So now the genes that were originally in the gene pool, their frequency are disrupted because there's a natural event that killed a lot of these frequencies. So my example, that was a bottleneck effect. There's also the founder effect, which is basically some individuals that move to this new colony and they try to start a new colony, and the genes that they bring with them are likely going to be the genes for the entire population, because they're the ones to reproduce, and when they reproduce, their descendants will reproduce, and so on and so on and so on and so on. Yep, simple. I know, simple. Alright, so last class is speciation. So this is the only macroevolution. It's a big change. We're creating a absolute new species here. That's insane. We don't do that just every day. Alright, that's insane actually. That's actually insane. So there are 3 types of selection. We reinstated that. There is the stabilizing selection. It is when we're selecting for the majority. So we're stabilizing the phenotype and, well, the genotype, sure. We're stabilizing the frequencies so that, well, everything is around the same. The majority becomes more majority and the minority becomes more minority. And we also learned directional, which is selecting one extreme or one side in general. We also learned disruptive, which selects for the minority only and kills all majorities. Normally, if a group of individuals can interbreed and create a viable offspring, we're gonna be like, okay, there's some sort of species, sure. They're probably in a species. However, when these 2 groups are in some sort of isolation, that they just start evolving differently. And they evolve so differently that they are no longer able to reproduce and make this viable offspring. That's when you have the idea of speciation. They change too much. So when they change too much, that's when you have speciation. Yep. So however, there's a couple ways this is enforced. There's a couple ways There's a couple different isolation methods. So we looked at number 1. There was prezygotic and postzygotic. Basically, it's before you fertilize and after you fertilize. So we have prezygotic. It was behavioral isolation. So we had birds. Some of them sing in 5 octaves, some of them sing 8 or 12 octaves. This means that a 5-octave bird will never be able to mate with a 12-octave bird because she thinks, hey, your 5-octave sounds too basic. Give me a 12-octave. Temporal is simple, just as its name states. It's literally timing. The timing is different. Just like I said, a flower that blooms in the summer will never ever be able to bloom in the winter. Will never ever be able to mate with a flower that blooms in the winter because they're blooming at a different time. They're pollinating and trying to get offspring at a different time. And then we had habitat isolation. They're in the same region. However, the habitat that they survive in is a little bit different. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that they evolve differently, and they sort of have different kind of mechanics that will in different functions. So all of these means that they cannot mate anymore. Unfortunate, I know. So, and what was the other one? Yeah, the other ones is it's sure you're able to mate, you're able to get all that in, you're able to do their sexual intentions and have fun. However, now we're going to prevent the sperm from actually fertilizing the egg. So we have to mechanical isolation. Sure, you guys develop sexual interest. However, your organs don't fit together. Unfortunate. So this is mostly evident in insects because theirs just don't fit, and this is also evident in ducks because their reproductive system is built in a extremely weird shape for some reason. Then we have what? We have gametic isolation. So even though the male parts and female parts are compatible and you guys have sexual interests together, well, unfortunately your sperm and egg doesn't work. So the sperm cell cannot go ahead and fertilize the egg cell. And that was the last prezygotic. So now we talk about prevention of hybrids. So now, sure, your sperm did fertilize your egg, and everything happened. So we have hybrid inviability. Yes, sure, you form a zygote, you created this baby. Well, it dies before it matures at all. That's evident in goats and sheep. We have hybrid sterility. Sure, your hybrid is able to mature. However, it cannot produce a generation after that. So, horses and donkeys, they mate together to produce mules. But mules cannot mate with anything to produce, well, anything. So, mules cannot make any offspring. Therefore, the horse and the donkey that created this mule, they are technically not fit. Finally, we have hybrid breakdown. The hybrid is able to mature, and it's able to reproduce, and sure, you created a generation, well, you can create the next. So the hybrid cannot become grandparents. There are two types of speciation and two types of evolution, and there's two type of speed of evolution. So first we have sympatric speciation. You're in the same geographical area. However, gene flow is altered, meaning there are chromosomal changes. And that means you're unable to mate. And so therefore, a new species is created. Allopatric is you're in a different geographic area, so you have this geographical barrier. And since there is a barrier, these two groups start to develop and they don't mate together anymore, so they evolve separately to a point where they are no longer able to mate and create a viable offspring. Simple enough. So the two types of evolution, it was pretty simple. I think it's the easiest part, but so you have conversion and diversion, basically. So conversion means that, well, we're going to talk about diversion first. So diversion is that these species, they were once very, very similar. However, evolution has driven them apart from each other. And now they're suddenly so different. And then conversion is that they were once very different. However, because they have so similar external factors, like environment, so they become more similar. So two types of speed of evolution. There's the idea of gradualism, where everything slowly changes and accumulates these changes so that eventually they will become a new species. However, they change when they do accumulate these changes. We don't notice because they change very slowly. And then punctuated equilibrium is the idea that counters gradualism. It believes that organisms remain stable and suddenly it changes and develops into a new species. However, speciation, which obviously wasn't just nature's doing. We played a big role. Remember, humans are like the big bad wolf that always disrupt all of the nature stuff. So we cut down forests, build croplands, and we create all of these new environments that obviously we develop new species. I guess that was a contribution to diversity, but whatever. Yeah, so that was a pretty long class, and we're gonna end it here. I know there's a bonus questions. We're gonna do that along with the test, and that is pretty much it.